Hi, I'm Keith Tiley, Global Chief Investment Officer at Wavemaker. I'm pleased to be here today with Brian Weiser, Group M's Global Head of Business Intelligence and the author of This Year, Next Year, Advertising's hotly anticipated media spend forecast. As the most turbulent year in recent history comes to a close, Brian joins us to assess the impact of COVID on 2020 and to help us answer the big question, what can we expect in 2021? So, Brian, let's get started. This year, we've seen roughly 6% erosion in global media billings. The media economies of some countries that have dealt with COVID pretty quickly and pretty effectively seem to have fared no better than many markets that didn't. What does that tell us about the global media market? So are these markets reliant on global client investment? And/or is this a function or a reflection of the fragility of their economies?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. It's really interesting to try to understand the causes of divergence between countries here with respect to advertising outcomes. At core, creative destruction is really what drives advertising. It tends to map to economic activity, but doesn't necessarily. And what I mean by that is the emergence and disappearance of different kinds of marketers who have different characteristics with respect to how they allocate budgets towards media or other activities is really the thing that drives advertising. Where we've seen growth, in particular outperformance relative to what we would have expected, primarily it's China, the US, and the UK, each of which are markets where e-commerce has played a disproportionately important role, and where, paradoxically, weaker businesses in the United States, lacking much in the way of a social safety net or meaningful hibernation policies, might have been pushed, if you will, to spend more online in a desperate effort to survive. And so you can have effectively weakness, both in terms of health outcomes for a society and an economy, and yet you can have a strong advertising market. We call that, the investment kids call that a secular tailwind. In the UK, you have some similar trends going on, arguably better hibernation policies, but you still have a reasonably strong foundation of e-commerce related activity. And, because of the scale of the lockdown, if you wanted to operate, you needed to be digital in that market. China, it's basically a normal market at this point in time. I mean, that's the other thing. They obviously suffered badly early on and really managed the pandemic afterwards very well. And to the extent that things are normal there, for lack of a better word, you get a pretty healthy market. Every other country, though, what's really interesting in the data is that if you look at the mean and the median market of the 60 or so countries we track, the median actually is only a little bit better than we thought earlier in the year. It's still down probably 11%, even if the mean is down 6%.
Okay. So, aside from the obvious uptick in e-com, COVID has accelerated a number of other media trends, such as a significant growth in streaming subscriptions. So in the first quarter, for example, of the new US upfront season, ratings seem to have dropped off a cliff. To what extent do you think that damage done to traditional media sectors is irreversible?
It doesn't need to be irreversible, but it probably is. I spent a little bit of time working for a startup about 10 years ago, and the best lesson I took away from that time is that the future doesn't need to be predetermined. It's just a function of whether or not someone with a great idea is willing to invest in changing it. And often nobody's willing to invest in changing it. And so where the change is and the momentum of change that's kind of in place right now, what's contributing to the acceleration of declines in viewing in the United States, and I think will have an eroding effect in every market around the world, it's the fact that there's so much more investment on a relative basis into streaming services. The owners of traditional TV networks are, for lack of a better word, disinvesting in their traditional programming. And for years, I would push back against people who would argue, "Oh, TV's dying, TV's dying, TV's dying. People are going online. People are going online. TV's never going to see growth again." I kept saying, "No, no, no. It's TV is the least bad alternative way to accomplish a goal for most marketers because you can still accomplish your reach and frequency objectives."
At a low CPM.
Yeah, but we're at a very different point in time now, where if the network owners are not keeping up, if they're not willing to sacrifice their margins in a desperate effort to hold on to budgets, they're going to struggle. And so it's like when we look at, in France, we have, say Salto, they have €100 million budget. That's almost cute by comparison to, what Netflix will probably spend in France. The same will be true in the UK. What's BritBox's budget? Not a particularly large amount compared to the £1 billion or so that Netflix will spend next year. And so the point is that those who are willing to invest in programming are likely to see audience share shifts. Shocker, right? And what we see from the owners of traditional properties is because they think they can actually sustain their profitability at levels they've historically experienced, there's a lack of willingness to invest against your platform. So, I think it's only irreversible because of the lack of a likelihood that the traditional media owners will make sufficient investments in their traditional properties to allow them to retain their capacity to deliver the reach and frequency marketers are used to.
Okay, let's go a bit lighter, a bit more quick fire now. Which marketing or media trend over the last 11 months, so year to date, have you found most surprising and why?
I think, e-commerce and the scale to which smaller businesses have kept pushing is probably it. And Shopify is sort of the typification of that. Shopify is just doing amazingly well representing small business expansion.
Cool. Right, looking forward to next year, 2021. What are the key observations we're making as Group M about next year's media marketplace?
Yeah, so in most markets on Earth, we get back to 2019 levels. And it's a really quick return in most cases, but it's not necessarily correct to say that, the V-shaped recovery that some talk about. The K is a better way to think about it, meaning you have accelerated growth for some, but a lot of weakness for others. And I think you'll still see generally weak print trends, even if consumption trends are okay. Audio is probably, okay. Digital formats are doing really well. I think it's better. It's hard to look at next year's numbers and cleanly understand what's going on because of the degree to which there's a rebound on an easy comparable. Focusing at 2023, 24, you start seeing normalized growth. And that's really where you can see the better long-term trends that we expect, which is, say, more digital than we thought before, healthy outdoor, tepid TV, declining print.
Yeah, I was going to ask about out-of-home and cinema because they were obviously most severely impacted by COVID and the lockdown restrictions that came with that. What are your views there?
Yeah, I mean, outdoor advertising in its traditional form and the digital extensions of it are still a very important medium. I mean, it's understandable why marketers would say, well, gee, people aren't going out and about as they used to. Maybe that's not the best place to spend money. That's understandable. Cinema evaporating also makes a lot of sense. I think the longer term, though, the relative value of outdoor in the eyes of marketers is unchanged. I think there's I characterize it as Apple envy. Apple as a marketer that's certainly made great use of outdoor is sort of the marketer that a lot of brands want to be, and that really covers the intersection of technology and luxury. So I think that as long as you have those trailbreakers, for lack of a better word, trailblazers rather, that will encourage marketers to continue to look at out-of-home media. Cinema, though, is going to be in a different place because I think that the studio business has fundamentally changed. Fewer titles will make it into theaters and cinemas going forward, And so the relative appeal of cinema is probably diminished over time.
Yeah. And I think we sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but in terms of markets, which do you see to be the sort of the biggest winners and losers? Is it kind of just simply a rebound or a reflection of declines that we've seen this year?
Most of what we're seeing is that. I mean, there's still some markets where, there's some underlying strength, like China. Again, it's still, you could argue that, even in a zone of between 100 and 200 billion dollars of activity is arguably underweight relative to the size of the market. And so there's still lots of room for them to, for lack of a better word, catch up. And that really supports ongoing underlying growth in that part of the world. Same with India, it makes sense why the likes of Facebook and Google are investing so much in relationships with different entities, governmental or commercial there, because, at a market that's worth approximately the same as Australia, for a population that's 40 times bigger, there's still lots of opportunity for growth in many markets around the world like that.
For sure. Okay, final sort of last bonus question. As Wavemaker, we believe the importance of positive provocation. What's your provocation to our clients for the year ahead?
Ignore all of the work that I've done, by which I mean, be aware that it is out there. Form your own view as a marketer about what you should do for your own brand. Don't pay attention to what everyone else is doing when you're making your decisions about what you're going to do. Independently form a view about the optimal allocation of resources. And then go and look at the data that we produce to be able to say, oh, well, the typical marketer is doing this, or the typical marketer is doing that. If you want to be average, do what the average marketer does. We're not saying this is what everyone should do. We're just saying it's what everyone will do. But don't do what everyone will do. Do something different.
Cool. Brian, thank you so much. I know this is a really busy time of the year for you, so absolutely appreciate your time. And to everyone else and everyone's watching, we hope you enjoy the full December 2020 This Year, Next Year report, and have a great holiday or Christmas break, depending on where you live. And we'll stay in touch and see you all next year. Thank you.
Thank you.